I'd like to begin with a kind of definition of beauty, which I say tongue in cheek because, as we will see, beauty really defies definition. I'm going to call it the dogma of beauty, the unalterable, categorical, controlling factor. And whatever else we might say about beauty, what I'm about to say, I would suggest, is dogmatic, that it must always be remembered and that it must always take precedence over everything else when it comes to us conceptualizing and thinking about the practice of beauty. Now, that's a pretty bold claim, I suppose, but you can decide if you think I'm right about this. Now, there's many ways that we could get to this dogma of beauty, but I'm going to use a phrase that shows up in the scriptures. It's in the Psalms at least 2 or 3 times. It's also in Chronicles twice. And it is important to note that in all 4 instances, this phrase refers to our worship of God. So it's beauty aligned with worship. The phrase is the beauty of holiness. And just to quote one of the passages from 1 Chronicles chapter 16, it says, "Give unto the Lord the glory due his name, bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness." The beauty of holiness. The beauty of holiness. Well, holiness, I would say, is beautiful. The beauty of holiness teaches us that holiness is beautiful, and therefore beauty is holiness. That's the dogma of beauty. Beauty is first of all holiness, in a similar way that truth is holiness, in a similar way that goodness is holiness. Okay, so let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves, what is holiness? Oftentimes, when we hear the term holy, we think of morality or ethics or virtue. Holiness is only these things secondarily. It's only the mirror of these things. Holiness is really, in the primary, a word that we use to say what God is in himself. The scriptures say that God is holy, holy, holy. He is the ultimate, immutable other, the uncreated, unlike anything else. So when we say that beauty is holiness, we're basically claiming that beauty is a property of being. And of course, there is only one who is the fullness of being, primary being, and that is God himself, the holy God, the beautiful God, the good God, the God who is true. So whatever else we're going to say about beauty, I think this dogma cannot be altered. It has to be our starting place. It has to control all of our other concepts and praxis about beauty. And I think that becomes very helpful to us when we kind of get into the weeds, when we start asking questions about, what makes a thing beautiful? Why is one thing beautiful to this person and not to another person? Or an interesting question, if somebody wants to discuss it, can a wicked or immoral person make something that is beautiful? And questions like that. So beauty as a property of being is absolutely objective. That's the starting place. We could put it this way when we speak of the transcendentals. God is not just good, God is the good. God is not just true, God is truth. God is not just beautiful, God is beauty. These are words which reflect on God in his holiness, as he is in himself, in his utter transcendence. So they're properties of his being. Now, we cannot know God as he is in himself. We know him in his outgoing energies as he pours out his divine life into creation. And as we experience God's divine energies, we reflect upon that experience. We were made to reflect upon it. We can't help ourselves. We contemplate it. We philosophize about it. We theologize about it. And we do our best to describe this experience of God's life flowing into his creation. In one sense, in God, in the unity of these transcendentals, there is in some way no distinction. They are all completely unified as a simple whole, the good, truth, and the beauty. This is God's perfection found in this absolute unity. But in another sense, we can distinguish between different aspects of these things as we experience them in creation. And I think as we do, it helps us to discover another distinction about the beautiful God and this energy of beauty, or St. Dionysius calls it the name. One of the names of God is beauty. As it fills our world, as it fills creation, as it fills lives. We might say truth is reflected in creation through the divine law, through philosophy, ultimately through theology. We might say that goodness is reflected in creation through moral, ethical, and the virtuous. But we would say that beauty, and this is what I think will be helpful to us as we think and contemplate about this topic, beauty is reflected in creation through joy and delight, through the sublime and the majestic. So truth grounds, goodness directs, but beauty flies. Truth stabilizes, goodness forms, and beauty delights. Truth fixes, goodness heals, and beauty calls us upward. Beauty is the glory of God. It's the splendor of his majesty. It causes in us awe. It engenders desire. Beauty really is the fullness of joy and delight. This is all part of God as he is in himself, the properties of his being. When we go from there, we begin to think about beauty in creation and our experience of beauty in creation. And thirdly, as makers of beauty, as artists, craftsmen, and makers of things that are hopefully beautiful. And we think about beauty in creation. The first thing to note, and this might be shocking to hear at first, but when you follow the logic, it will make sense. Everything that exists is in some degree beautiful. Everything. Beauty is the property of being. God alone is the fullness of being. God alone has being in and of himself. Everything that exists has its being from God. Everything that exists in creation, therefore, is in some degree beautiful. From the tiniest fruit fly to the grandest solar system, everything that exists is beautiful. Secondly, beauty is objective. We've already said this. It's obviously objective in terms of being a property of God's being, of God being beauty, God being beautiful. But it is also objective in creation. It has to be because he's the creator. And in creation, we can identify certain principles of beauty. We can observe these things and we can see these patterns repeated. And they are, even within the creation, objective. If what I'm about to share here in a moment interests you, I would recommend that you look into an unlikely source, actually. His name is Christopher Alexander. He's a great thinker of the 20th century. He's passed on now, but he was an architect, urban planner, among other things. He spent his life really unpacking this sort of a logos cosmology. He didn't call it that, but that's essentially what it was. And he discovered various observable patterns within nature that all of humanity had patterned their making of things after, whether it be, the layout of a village or, the proportion of a room, a three-legged stool, anything that was being made was sort of, humankind was recognizing something indelible in creation. And he identified different things that you could different grids you could pass through, like scale, or alternating repetition, or good shape. Think of the shape of a nautilus shell, the shape of a wave as it rolls into the shore, the shape of a leaf. He talked about symmetry and order, contrast, gradients, roughness, for example, proportion, all of these things. And he identified about 15 to 19 different things. And for all of history, actually, up until the modern times, anything that was made sort of followed these patterns in nature. And man recognized, whether intuitively or thoughtfully and intelligently, that nature and creation, that these shapes, these patterns, these proportions, these scales, these contrasts, these repetitions, these fractals, they were objectively beautiful. They were objectively somehow good and objectively true. We know as Christians why that's true. It's because the Logos created them. And they have, in a sense, his divine thumbprint on them. He gave each thing he made its own inner Logos, its own inner essence or principle of being, which makes it what it is. So when a maker, and I like the term maker instead of even artist or craftsman, when a maker, it could be a poet, it could be, a musician, it could be anybody, a potter. When a maker, no matter who they are, violates these objective realities, which are stamped on creation by the Logos himself, which exist, they produce ugliness and disorder. And as artists and craftsmen and makers, we are not to be inventing new realities. We draw on what the Creator has made and the image that exists in creation. And we create and we make things according to these same patterns and images that He has already established because they are good and true and beautiful. And really, at the very heart of modernism in art and architecture, there is, it's really an atheistic sort of philosophy, because there is a denial of the objectivity of these shapes and patterns and scale as they appear in nature. That's really at the heart of modernistic art and architecture. This modern maker seeks to deny any objectivity to the goodness or beauty of creation that exists, God's thumbprint, and he determines that he will determine what is beautiful in terms of shape and design. He's his own God, his own source of a new reality. When he does this, he creates disorder, he destroys wholeness, he really, and this is not too much to say, actually, properly understood, he really commits some kind of evil, an immorality in shape that brutalizes man and brutalizes our society. You know, ugliness, in this sense, it is a destructive sin. And ugliness is a sin because it falls short of the glory of God, which is the beauty of God, the splendor of God, the splendor of holiness. It's easy for us, perhaps, to understand immorality as a sin. But when we violate the nature of things, and this includes the material creation, good shape, right proportion, right order, this is also a kind of sin. And since modernism, it has afflicted our societies in a most devastating way. And for us to understand how to create a beautiful space, for example, architecturally, even within a church, the proportions, the ceiling height, the Christopher Alexander demonstrates, I'll give you one example, that the inside corner of a room, if the inside corner of a room is more acute than 90 degrees, and you find yourself in a room, it's disruptive to your inner peace. If you get that wrong, it creates a disruption inside of you. And I didn't prepare a slideshow, but there is a cathedral in Los Angeles, which the entire cathedral, all of the walls are very acute inner angles. and it's an absolute violation by the architect who's trying to play God and say, I can violate natural, the natural order of things and recreate my own sort of reality, is what it is. But this stuff is not conceptual or abstract. It's very real and incarnational. So, when we speak of the nature of things, we also describe beauty in creation as a thing that's expressing the logos, that inner principle, that rationality that God, the logos, the word, gave it. And when a thing is existing and functioning and being according to its own nature, as it's received it from its maker, when it's fully functioning in its proper self, as God made it to be, we call that beautiful. That might be another definition for beauty in creation. Everything bears its own sort of ontological secret within itself. It has an operating mystery, a principle of intelligibility. I think one theologian said, there's a clarity that comes, a proper clarity of itself. So basically, when something is being itself as God made it to be, and we participate, we witness it, we're in its presence, what do? We delight in this. And it can be something very simple, a tool, a beautiful piece of pottery. I'm a maker of things. I spent my life and my other outside of the priesthood being a maker of things my whole life. To have a small, punch, that I use in the shop that's been perfectly proportioned, to hold it in the hand year after year brings a certain kind of delight. We call it beautiful when we see things in this purity and clarity. So this brings us to another sort of critically important principle which affects beauty, I think, in worship, and that's the sense of, or the idea of appropriateness, which again, in our modern society is not valued. I think many people would not catch the profundity of the idea of appropriateness, but it is incredibly profound. Something is beautiful when it's fully appropriate. There are things which are beautiful in one setting and in one condition, but not appropriate in another. So not everything is beautiful in every situation. And that's very important to understand. It's not enough for us to include something beautiful in our worship if it is inappropriate in that setting. And there are many things that are beautiful that are not appropriate in a worship setting. I think this is too much to get into for this presentation, but we could probably come up with, they wouldn't be perfect, but we could probably come up with a set of filters that would test the appropriateness of something for our worship, which would be an interesting exercise. Also, revealing beauty or uncovering beauty in this world, which is broken and contaminated and stained, it is a job for the artist. It's his work, for the craftsman, for the maker of things. And as we have said, this transcendental beauty of God's holiness is reflected in creation as a secondary, sort of derived or contingent beauty, just as you and I are contingent beings. We don't possess being in and of ourselves. We are contingent beings. We are mirrors, images of God. Likewise, the beauty in creation is a contingent, secondary, derived beauty. But this beauty in creation even has also become somewhat tarnished by the permeation of sin and corruption in our world. And it is our job as Christians, and particularly of makers of things, of artists and artisans, especially in the context of this conversation or this presentation, to mine the depths, to uncover what has been hidden, to recover the latent beauty in creation, to basically polish the mirror. And as Robin so beautifully put, it is a difficult and strenuous work. And I think this also goes against the sort of basic maxim of modernism that if it should be easy, it's not easy. It requires a tremendous amount of labor and practice and many do-overs and suffering, great suffering. And in our shop, we always say there's a big scrap pile next to the blacksmith because there's lots of fails and lots of do-overs and lots of practice and lots of learning. And it's a painful experience at times to make something truly beautiful out of this material creation. And in addition to this, as Robin also, I think, eloquently said, that the discovery of what's truly beautiful also requires instruction and study. It requires an informed mind, an educated sensibility, and a right ordered. And a lot of people need to learn what is beautiful. If beauty and the things that we make are beautiful, the goal, the ultimate goal of this secondary beauty in creation is to draw us up to God, to bring our desire to God, and to contemplate really the invisible and eternal things. Beauty really should lead us to the contemplation, to the knowledge of God. St. Gregory of Nyssa said, once this taste is learned, divine beauty inflames desire, drawing one on into an endless stretching out toward an ever-grading embrace of the divine glory. Now, can you enjoy beauty without contemplation? I think so. I think you can simply, in a very simple way, you can be in the presence of something beautiful. It could be a beautiful space. It could be a beautiful piece of music. I've read poetry that I didn't hardly understand a single word of it. I'm sure you've all had that experience, but simply the cadence of the words and the sounds of the words rolling into your heart. There was a kind of beauty in that really fed the soul and brought peace to you. We chant the Psalms. Now I try and pay attention to the Psalms as I'm saying the words, and I try and contemplate on the meaning of the words, but sometimes, not always, achieve that. Sometimes simply hearing the cadence of the words and the chant of the Psalms and the hymns provides a certain wave of beauty in the soul. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is something that is good and holy and beneficial to us, and can bring us some delight. But it's a lower experience. I mean, ultimately, the end of beauty is for it to bring us to the delight of knowing God and of deep, intimate contemplation of God. It's an object of spiritual intelligence, beauty is, and it opens us up. It opens us up to the infinity of being. Something else that is interesting, that's been observed by those who have studied beauty is that of our senses, and it goes along with this beauty leading us to knowledge, the eyes and the ears are the primary senses that draw us into contemplation and knowledge in a way that the other senses do not. I don't know how long I went, but I think I will. I've other notes, but I'll save it for some conversation and questions. Maybe some of these other things will come up, but I think I will stop there.
Right.
Let me see if I have a closing remark. I think it would be interesting to discuss the subjectivity of beauty, which I've insisted that there isn't a subjectivity of beauty in the proper sense, but that as each of us experiences beauty, we experience it some subjective, is subject to our own experience and formation.